Welcome to day 224 on the trail. We have four readings for today. From Galatians chapter 1 verse 1 through 2:10, 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 1 through 9:37, 2 Chronicles 21 verse 1 through 22:9, and 4 Maccabees chapter 18 verses 6 through 24. In our reading from 2 Kings, we find a lesson in God's timing and patience. Now back in 1 Kings 19, Elijah was given a mission to accomplish after leaving Mount Horeb. From 1 Kings 19, beginning in verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel-Meholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill. And whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." These events are not immediately carried out by Elijah. Instead, they are performed by Elisha. In 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 13, it is Elisha who will tell Hazael that he will become king of Aram. From 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 13, Hazael said, "What is your servant, who is a mere dog, that he should do this great thing?" Elisha answered, "The Lord has shown me that you are to be king over Aram." However, this is not a peaceful transition of power. Instead, Hazael lies to King Ben-Hadad and then murdered him. Then Elisha sends one of his companies to anoint Jehu as king of Israel, the northern kingdom. This transition will also end in bloodshed, as Jehu kills Jehoram, thus ending the dynasty of Omri. Jezebel is also killed by Jehu for her wickedness, thus fulfilling the prophecies of Elijah. 2 Kings chapter 9, beginning in verse 36. When they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. The corpse of Jezebel shall be like dung on the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" Turning now to the New Testament. Today we begin Paul's letter to a group of churches in a region known as Galatia. However, the first question we have to ask is where these churches are actually located. There are two theories that are typically suggested. The first is that Paul is writing to Christians in the northern territory of Asia Minor. If this is the case, then we would have some insight into Paul's approach to those living in rural areas. The second option is the Roman province of Galatia in the south. This would have included major cities that were visited by Paul and Barnabas, such as Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. The dating of this letter is also problematic. Since in the letter, Paul writes at length about circumcision and Jewish law, the question is often raised if Galatians was written prior to the Jerusalem Council as recorded in Acts 15. If Galatians is written before, perhaps sometime during Paul's first missionary journey, then the letter would act as a precursor to the topics discussed at the council in Jerusalem. However, if the council has already taken place, why did Paul not reference the conclusion reached by the elders in Jerusalem? However, regardless of these arguments, the dating of the letter remains uncertain. Compared to other letters of Paul in the New Testament, Galatians has a very emotional tone which is distinctive. Its rhetoric is emotional, and even hostile from the beginning. In fact, as we discussed earlier, Paul typically includes a Thanksgiving section in his letters, where he introduces important themes contained within the letter. However, in Galatians, that characteristic Thanksgiving is missing. Instead, he replaces it with a harsh critique right at the beginning. Galatians chapter 1, verse 6. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Then Paul immediately levels a curse against those who have been causing trouble. Continuing in verse 8. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should proclaim to you a gospel contrary to what we proclaim to you, let that one be accursed. As we have said before, so now I repeat, if anyone proclaims to you a gospel contrary to what you received, let that one be accursed. And toward the end of the letter, Paul is even more hostile toward those troubling Christians in Galatia. Chapter 5, verse 11. But my friends, why am I still being persecuted if I am still preaching circumcision? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would castrate themselves. So why is Paul's response so severe? The Galatians were converted directly from paganism and would have been unfamiliar with the Torah. Therefore, when Jewish Christians arrived in Galatia and taught them that they needed the Torah as well as faith in Jesus, Paul was angry that the young Gentile communities were being led astray and distracted from the truth of the gospel. The identity of these troublemakers is unknown, and Paul does not provide any specific information on who they are. However, the agitation they are causing among the Galatians is extremely troubling for Paul, and the agitators are attacking Paul himself on two fronts. First, they question Paul's credentials as an apostle. Paul was not one of the original disciples of Jesus and has to report to the leaders in Jerusalem. However, Paul points out that his call and mission come from Jesus directly. Also, Paul demonstrates his commitment to his mission from Jesus and the consistency of his message. Chapter 1, verse 10. Am I now seeking human approval or God's approval? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still pleasing people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Second, the agitators believe that Paul's teaching and message is incomplete because he does not include the commandments outlined in the Torah. We have seen Paul address these concerns in his other letters. However, this issue regarding adherence to the Torah is especially troubling for the Galatians. Since they have been converted from the pagan religious practices of the Greco-Roman world, they may have been more sensitive to the belief that there is more to the Christian faith than faith in Jesus. The concept of multiple stages of initiations, or belief, was a standard feature of the mystery religions of the time. Therefore, the Galatians would have been more susceptible to believing those who taught that adherence to the Torah was a requirement of the Christian faith. I would like to make one final comment about Paul's use of the expression pistis Christou, which we discussed during our exploration of Romans. This Greek expression can be translated either faith in Christ or faith of Christ, that is, Christ's own faith. The two are distinct, yet closely related. Paul often talks about how Christians are to have faith in Christ, that is, a trusting dependence on Jesus. This is a faith that is confessional, that trusts in who Jesus is as the Son of God, and his teachings, and his salvific work. However, Paul also repeatedly highlights the importance of Jesus' own faith in his Father. In this case, pistis Christou, the faith of the Messiah. is Jesus' faithful response to God. And the faithful obedience that Jesus showed to the Father in his life and death is what makes our salvation possible. The faith of Jesus is Jesus' response to God, which enables us to even have faith and to be made righteous by faith. Therefore, God's righteousness was revealed and established through the faithfulness of Jesus, including his death on the cross, which makes it possible to trust and obey God the same way that Jesus did. If we follow this approach from Paul throughout his letter, then Galatians chapter 2, verse 20 might more accurately read like this: I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.